You're nothing but a guest in this house. Linda's voice echoed through the dining room as she slammed her hand on the antique mahogany table. No marriage certificate means no rights. Pack your things and leave. I sat there, calmly sipping my tea while my mother-in-law's face turned an interesting shade of red. At 35, I'd spent the last 8 years tolerating her constant attempts to drive me away from her precious son, James. But today was different. Today, I had something she didn't know about. Actually, Linda, I said, placing my cup down gently, I think you might want to see what's in this envelope first. My name is Sophia, and I never planned to be in this position. 8 years ago, when James and I fell in love, he convinced me that we didn't need a formal marriage registration. It's just a piece of paper, he'd said, his green eyes twinkling with that charm that had first drawn me in. We know what we mean to each other. What I didn't know then was that his mother had orchestrated the whole thing. Linda Bennett, matriarch of the prestigious Bennett family, had never approved of me. In her eyes, I was just a music teacher who'd somehow ensnared her surgeon's son. No pedigree, no family connections, no trust fund. I wasn't what she'd envisioned for her only child. The envelope sat heavy in my hands as I watched Linda's expression shift from rage to curiosity. 8 years of careful planning had led to this moment. 8 years of collecting evidence, of quiet investigation, of playing the perfect daughter-in-law while Linda schemed behind my back. What's this nonsense? Linda snapped, but her hand trembled slightly as she reached for the envelope. Another one of your pathetic attempts to claim what isn't yours. James sat silently at the end of the table, his face pale. He knew what was coming. We'd had our own conversation just last week, when I'd shown him the initial results. The DNA test that proved he wasn't Linda's biological son. I still remember the day I discovered the truth. It was during one of Linda's famous garden parties, 3 months ago. I'd gone upstairs to fetch her favorite shawl when I overheard her arguing with someone in her study. The door was slightly ajar, and through it, I saw her talking to an elderly woman I'd never seen before. You promised never to tell them, Linda had hissed. The money I paid you was supposed to ensure your silence. The woman, who I later learned was Martha Collins, a former nurse, had replied shakily, but he deserves to know the truth about the switch, about his real mother. That conversation set me on a path of investigation that uncovered a 35-year-old secret. Linda Bennett had switched babies in the hospital, choosing a healthier infant to replace her own sickly newborn. She paid off the nurse and created an elaborate lie that she'd maintained for over 3 decades. Open it, I said softly, watching as Linda's perfectly manicured fingers trembled against the sealed envelope. I think it's time we all face the truth, don't you? The dining room fell silent except for the sound of tearing paper. I could hear the grandfather clock in the hall ticking away, marking each second as Linda pulled out the DNA results. Her eyes scanned the document, growing wider with each line she read. This is impossible, she whispered, her face draining of color. You falsified these results. You must have. I pulled out my phone and played the recording of her conversation with Martha Collins. Linda's face went from pale to ashen as her own voice filled the room, confessing to her decades-old crime. I have more, I said calmly, reaching into my bag. Birth records, hospital documents, Martha Collins' sworn statement. Would you like to see those too? James finally spoke, his voice hoarse with emotion. Why, Mother? Why would you do this? Linda crumpled the papers in her hands, tears streaming down her face. My baby was dying, she choked out. The doctor said he wouldn't survive the week. But you were so perfect, so healthy. I couldn't bear to lose my only child. I did what any mother would do. Any mother. I repeated, my voice sharp. You stole someone else's child, Linda. You robbed another woman of her son. And now you have the audacity to try to chase me away because I don't have a marriage certificate. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Linda, who had spent years questioning my legitimacy in her son's life, was facing the ultimate question of legitimacy herself. Where is she? James demanded, standing up. My real mother, is she alive? I nodded slowly. Her name is Elizabeth Carter. She lives in Portland, and unlike some people, I glanced pointedly at Linda. She's been desperate to know what happened to her son all these years. Linda collapsed into her chair, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. The woman who had spent years tormenting me about not being officially part of the family was about to learn a harsh lesson about what family really means. The police have already been notified, I added, gathering my things. They're very interested in speaking with you about the hospital records you falsified, and Martha Collins has agreed to testify. As I stood to leave, Linda grabbed my arm, her grip desperate. Please, she begged, you can't do this. This is my family. I gently removed her hand, looking her straight in the eyes. No, Linda, this was never your family. It was stolen, just like you tried to steal my place in it. The only difference is I have proof of your crimes. The sound of police sirens in the distance brought a fitting end to our conversation. As Linda buried her face in her hands, I turned to James, who looked shell-shocked but resolute. Ready to meet your real mother? I asked softly. He nodded, taking my hand. Together, he said firmly, as a real family should be. The drive to Portland was quiet, filled with the weight of unspoken thoughts. James gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white as we made our way through the rain-slicked roads. I watched his profile, noting how he seemed to be processing years of lies with each passing mile. Linda's arrest had made the local news, though the full story was still unfolding. The police had found more evidence in her study. Documents, letters, and a diary that detailed her elaborate scheme. She'd not only switched the babies but had actively worked to keep Elizabeth Carter away from Boston, using her family's influence to block any attempts at investigation. What if she doesn't want to meet me? James finally broke the silence, his voice barely above a whisper. What if she's built a life without me and doesn't want to disrupt it? I reached over and squeezed his hand. Elizabeth has been searching for you for 35 years. She never gave up hope. During my investigation, I found Elizabeth through an online support group for parents of missing children. Her story had caught my attention immediately. A baby switch at Massachusetts General Hospital, the same hospital where James was born. When I reached out to her, the pieces started falling into place. We pulled up to a modest craftsman-style house with a well-tended garden. Wind chimes tinkled softly on the porch, and through the window, we could see warm light spilling out. James sat frozen in the driver's seat, staring at the house. What do I even say? He asked, running a hand through his hair. How do you start a conversation with a mother you never knew you had? Before I could answer, the front door opened. Elizabeth Carter stood in the doorway, one hand pressed against her heart. She was a petite woman with James's same green eyes and gentle features. The resemblance was striking, something Linda had probably noticed and feared all these years. James, her voice carried across the yard, trembling with emotion. The moment felt surreal as we walked up the path. Elizabeth's hands shook as she reached out to touch James's face, tears streaming down her cheeks. I knew, she whispered. I knew in my heart you were out there somewhere. Inside, Elizabeth's home was warm and inviting, filled with books and family photos. She led us to the living room where tea and cookies were already set out. I've been baking all day, she admitted with a nervous laugh. I didn't know what else to do with myself. As we sat down, Elizabeth pulled out an old photo album. I want you to see something, she said, opening to a page marked with a faded ribbon. This is your father, Thomas. He passed away 10 years ago, still believing we'd find you someday. James stared at the photo of a man who shared his smile, his hands gripping the album tightly. I have siblings, he asked, noticing other family photos. Elizabeth nodded, wiping away tears. 2 sisters, Sarah and Emma. They're so excited to meet you. They'd grown up hearing about their lost brother. As Elizabeth shared stories about James's biological family, I watched the tension slowly leave his shoulders. Here was a mother who had never stopped loving him, never stopped searching, never tried to control or manipulate his life. I tried to find you, Elizabeth said, her voice catching. For years, I hired private investigators, reached out to hospitals, even appeared on true crime shows. But Linda Bennett's influence was too strong. Every lead would suddenly go cold. Every inquiry would hit a dead end. James looked up from the album, his eyes filled with a mix of pain and anger. She robbed us of so much time, he said quietly. All those years. Elizabeth reached out and took his hand. We have now, she said firmly. And thanks to Sophia, we have the truth. When she contacted me, showed me the evidence she gathered, it was like all my prayers had finally been answered. The conversation flowed naturally after that, Years of lost time trying to compress themselves into hours. Elizabeth showed James more family photos, told him about his sisters, his extended family, the grandfather who had left him a trust fund that Linda had somehow managed to hide. "There's something else you should know," Elizabeth said, getting up to retrieve a document from her desk. "When Sophia first contacted me, I had my lawyer prepare this. It's the deed to this house, and I've added your name to it." James started to protest, but Elizabeth held up her hand. "This house has been in our family for generations. It should have been your home too. I want you to have a legal claim to your heritage, something that can't be taken away." As she handed him the papers, our phones buzzed simultaneously. It was a news alert. Linda had attempted to flee custody but had been caught at the airport. She'd been trying to board a flight to the Cayman Islands with a fake passport and a substantial amount of cash. "She never learned," I said, shaking my head. "Even now, she's still trying to run from the truth." Elizabeth set down her tea with a steady hand. "What she did, stealing a child, destroying records, using her influence to cover it up. She'll have to face the consequences now." James was quiet for a moment, then looked at his biological mother with determination. "I want to know everything," he said. "Every detail about our family, every story, every tradition. I want to make up for all the time we lost." Elizabeth's face lit up with joy. "Well, then," she said, reaching for another photo album, "let me tell you about the summer your father and I met. It was right here in Portland." As Elizabeth began her story, I watched James lean forward, absorbing every word. The weight of Linda's lies seemed to lift with each passing moment, replaced by the warmth of genuine family love. Outside, the rain had stopped and sunlight was breaking through the clouds, as if nature itself was celebrating this long-awaited reunion. 3 months later, I stood in the doorway of our new Portland home, watching James and Elizabeth work together in the garden. They were planting roses, a Carter family tradition, Elizabeth had explained. Every generation added their own variety to the garden. The criminal case against Linda had moved quickly, with Martha Collins' testimony, the hospital records, and Linda's own detailed diary. The prosecution had an airtight case. She'd been sentenced to 15 years for kidnapping, fraud, and obstruction of justice. The Bennett family fortune, built partially on her lies, was being investigated. James's sisters, Sarah and Emma, have flown in from Seattle and Chicago respectively. The reunion had been tearful but joyous. Looking at them together, the family resemblance was undeniable. They shared the same laugh, the same expressive hands when they talked, even the same way of scrunching their noses when confused. "You know what's funny?" Sarah had said during one of our family dinners. "We used to play this game when we were kids, imagining what our brother would be like. Emma always said he'd be a doctor." While she got that part right, James had laughed, finally comfortable with his place in this new family. The transition hadn't been entirely smooth. James had good days and bad days, moments when the weight of Linda's betrayal would hit him anew. But Elizabeth's unwavering love and acceptance helped heal wounds he hadn't even known he carried. "Sophia," Elizabeth called from the garden, waving me over. "Come help us decide where to plant James' roses." As I joined them, kneeling in the rich soil, I couldn't help but smile at how natural this felt. Elizabeth had embraced me as warmly as she had James, treating me like the daughter she'd always wanted. "I was thinking," James said, wiping dirt from his hands, "maybe we should have that wedding ceremony now. A real celebration with our real family." I looked up, surprised. After years of avoiding official registration, this suggestion meant more than just paperwork. It was James' way of fully embracing his true identity, his real family, and our future together. Elizabeth beamed, already planning in her head. "We could have it right here in the garden. Your grandfather got married here too, you know. It's another Carter tradition." The mention of traditions reminded me of something. I went inside and returned with a small box I'd been saving for the right moment. "Speaking of family traditions," I said, opening the box to reveal an antique locket. "Elizabeth gave me this last week. It has pictures of your grandparents on their wedding day. She thought you might want to have it." James took the locket carefully, his eyes moistening as he opened it to see the faces of the grandparents he'd never known. "They look so happy," he said softly. "They would have adored you," Elizabeth assured him, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Just like they would have loved Sophia for bringing our family back together." That evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, James pulled me close. "Thank you," he whispered, for not giving up, for finding the truth, for giving me my real family. I squeezed his hand, remembering that tense dinner with Linda 3 months ago. I always knew we were meant to be a real family, we just had to find the right one. Inside, we could hear Elizabeth on the phone with Emma, excitedly discussing wedding plans. Sarah had already texted several venue suggestions, though we all knew the garden would be perfect. The next morning brought news that Linda had attempted to appeal her sentence, claiming diminished capacity. The judge had denied her requests, seeing through her final attempt at manipulation. "She'll never change," James said when he heard the news, but his voice held no bitterness anymore. "But she gave me one gift, even if she didn't mean to. She led me to you, and through you to my real family." As spring turned to summer, the roses James and Elizabeth planted began to bloom, deep red blossoms that Elizabeth said matched the ones her husband had planted when they first moved in. Life had come full circle in the most unexpected way. Looking back at that dinner where Linda had tried to throw me out, claiming I had no rights without a marriage certificate, I realized she had inadvertently set in motion events that would give James something far more valuable than any legal document: the truth about his identity in a family built on real love rather than lies and manipulation. "You know what's ironic?" I said to James as we watched the sunset from our new porch. "Linda was so focused on keeping me out of the family that she never realized she was the one who didn't belong." James nodded, a peaceful smile on his face. "Sometimes the family you're meant to have finds you, even if it takes 35 years and one very determined wife." As if on cue, Elizabeth called us in for dinner, her voice filled with the warmth that had been missing from Linda's all those years. We went inside together, leaving the shadows of the past behind and stepping into the light of our true family's love.